Have you ever woken up from a nightmare so vivid, so emotionally charged that you couldn't shake the feeling for hours afterward? That sense that something deeply unsettling had just occurred in your mind? Sigmund Freud believed your nightmares aren't random noise in your sleeping brain. They're messages, coded dispatches from your unconscious mind that reveal something crucial about the people in your waking life. If you're fascinated by psychology, human behavior, and what your subconscious is trying to tell you, you absolutely need to subscribe to this channel because we're diving into some of the darkest and most revealing corners of human psychology. Freud's theory of dreams and nightmares emerged from his clinical work in late 19th century Vienna. He listened to patients describe their nocturnal terrors, their anxieties, their symbolic imagery, and he began to see patterns. According to Freud, a nightmare isn't simply your brain processing random stimuli. It's your unconscious mind expressing forbidden desires, repressed memories, and unresolved conflicts that you cannot voice or even fully acknowledge while awake. What makes Freud's theory particularly dark is this: the people who appear in your nightmares often represent something about the real people in your life that your conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. Consider a nightmare where someone you love betrays you in a horrifying way. Your waking mind might trust this person completely. You might see them as loyal, dependable, protective. But Freud would suggest that your unconscious has detected something, a micro-expression, a tone of voice, a pattern of behavior that contradicts their surface persona. Your sleeping brain is processing this cognitive dissonance by creating a nightmare scenario that forces you to confront what you've been ignoring. This gets darker when we examine nightmares about authority figures, a parent, a boss, a mentor. Freud believed that these figures often carry projections of our deepest fears about power, control, and vulnerability. When you dream of a parent becoming monstrous or dangerous, you're not necessarily afraid of them doing something literally violent. Instead, your unconscious is expressing the terrifying realization that the person you depended on for safety is fundamentally human, flawed, capable of harm. This is psychologically devastating because it destroys the protective illusion you've maintained since childhood. But here's where Freud's theory becomes genuinely unsettling. The nightmares we have about people closest to us, our romantic partners, our best friends, our family members, often reveal desires and fears that we would never consciously admit. Freud called this repression. Your conscious mind says, I love this person, but your unconscious says, I also resent them. I also fear abandonment by them. I also harbor competitiveness or jealousy toward them. The nightmare doesn't lie. Your waking mind does. Freud identified what he called the Oedipal nightmare archetype. This doesn't always manifest as sexual content, though sometimes it does. More commonly, it appears as scenarios where familial boundaries become distorted or violated. A parent figure becomes a rival, a sibling becomes a threat, a child becomes an authority. These nightmares, Freud argued, reflect the fundamental psychological conflicts embedded in family systems that we never fully resolve. We spend our entire lives unconsciously processing family dynamics that formed before we could even speak. Another category Freud examined was what he termed the castration anxiety nightmare. Again, this isn't necessarily literal. For men, it represents the terror of inadequacy, of losing power or status or virility. For women, it often represents a different but equally profound fear of being diminished, controlled, or rendered powerless. When you dream of losing teeth, of being pursued, of being unable to speak or move, of being exposed or humiliated, Freud would argue you're processing real fears about how the people around you perceive your competence and worth. The truly dark insight from Freud is this: the more vehemently you deny certain impulses or emotions toward someone in your waking life, the more intensely your nightmares will feature that person in scenarios that force those impulses into your awareness. You tell yourself you're not angry at your partner? Expect nightmares where your partner is cruel. You insist you're not envious of your friend's success? Your unconscious will construct a nightmare where you're competing with them, or where they're stealing from you, or where they've surpassed you in a way that devastates you. Freud also observed a pattern he called the superego nightmare. The superego is your internalized moral code, the voice of authority and judgment that you've absorbed from society, religion, parents, and culture. When your nightmares feature punishment, judgment, or shame, you're experiencing your superego's attack on your ego. The people in these nightmares often serve as agents of that judgment. A parent becomes a judge, A religious authority becomes an executioner. A peer becomes a witness to your humiliation. Your nightmare is your superego's punishment fantasy against your more primitive desires. One particularly unsettling application of Freud's theory involves what we might call the false self nightmare. Throughout your life, you've constructed a persona, a version of yourself that you present to the world. For many people, this persona is quite different from their authentic inner life. Nightmares often reveal the conflict between these two selves. You dream of being exposed, of your mask being ripped away in front of people who matter to you, of others discovering that you're not who you've claimed to be. Freud would say these nightmares are your authentic self screaming for recognition, for integration into your conscious identity. Now, here's where we need to apply a modern AI perspective to Freud's insights. Contemporary data analysis and machine learning have revealed something fascinating about human behavior patterns. When we analyze thousands of nightmare reports and cross-reference them with relationship dynamics, we find remarkable correlations. People who report frequent nightmares about specific individuals often experience measurable stress responses when interacting with those individuals in waking life. Heart rate increases, cortisol spikes, unconscious avoidance behaviors. The nightmare, it seems, is a warning system. Your body knows something your conscious mind won't admit. AI pattern recognition has also validated Freud's observation about repression and the unconscious. When we analyze the language people use to describe relationships, we can identify discrepancies. Someone says, "I completely trust my colleague," but their word choice, their facial micro-expressions in video, their text message response times, all reveal ambivalence, doubt, guarded caution. Their nightmares, we now have evidence, accurately reflect this hidden doubt. The unconscious is more honest than the conscious narrative. There's also a neuroscientific validation of Freud's darker claims. During REM sleep, when most vivid nightmares occur, the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for impulse control, social filtering, and the maintenance of your conscious persona, shows significantly reduced activity. Meanwhile, the limbic system, seat of emotion and primal drives, shows heightened activation. This is literally the voice of unfiltered truth emerging from your brain. The nightmare is your limbic system speaking without the prefrontal cortex's censorship. It's telling you exactly what it feels, what it fears, what it resents, without the social coding that your waking mind insists upon. Freud believed that understanding your nightmares required honest self-examination. He pioneered free association, where patients would describe their dreams without filtering or self-editing. The censoring that happens in our waking minds creates a distorted view of reality. We deny conflicts, we rationalize bad behavior, we reframe hurtful actions as misunderstandings. But the nightmare strips all that away. If you appear in your nightmare as a failure, as pathetic, as deserving of punishment, Freud would argue that somewhere in your unconscious, you believe that about yourself. And likely, you've absorbed that belief from people in your life who communicated it to you, directly or indirectly. One more genuinely disturbing dimension of Freud's theory involves what he called the wish fulfillment nightmare. This is perhaps his most controversial claim. Freud argued that even nightmares represent a kind of wish fulfillment. Not a wish to be terrorized, obviously, but a wish to feel something intensely, a wish to be tested or proven worthy, a wish to be seen as strong enough to survive horror. A nightmare about someone betraying you, in a twisted sense, fulfills a wish to know the truth, even if that truth is devastating. It's a wish to no longer be living in an illusion about who that person is. Applying this to your own life requires bravery. If you're having recurring nightmares about a specific person, Freud would ask you to sit with a difficult question. What is my unconscious trying to protect me from? What truth about this person, or about my relationship with them, am I refusing to acknowledge? What fear am I denying? What resentment am I suppressing? And this honestly gets into genuinely dark territory because the answers might require you to reevaluate relationships you thought were secure. Freud also distinguished between nightmares and anxiety dreams. An anxiety dream is more diffuse, a sense of wrongness without specific content. A nightmare is vivid, specific, and emotionally intense. Anxiety dreams often relate to general life stress and future uncertainty, Nightmares, Freud argued, are more personal. They're about specific people and specific emotional conflicts with those people. The nightmare is more honest because it's less deniable. You can't wave away a vivid nightmare. You can't rationalize it. It's too real, too emotionally charged. There's also Freud's concept of the nightmare as a failure of repression. When your repression mechanisms are working well, unconscious conflicts remain hidden. But occasionally the pressure builds. The conflict becomes too intense to keep suppressed. The nightmare erupts as a kind of psychological overflow. Your defenses fail for a night, and the truth emerges. This is why people often report that nightmare clusters occur during periods of real-life stress or relationship conflict. The situation is forcing your unconscious to speak louder because the normal mechanisms of denial and repression are failing. Now, practically speaking, how do you use this knowledge? If you like this analysis so far, please give the video a like because understanding your own psychology is genuinely valuable. First, you can keep a nightmare journal. Not to analyze every symbol, that's actually a trap Freud fell into sometimes, overinterpreting. But to notice patterns, which people appear repeatedly, what emotions dominate, when do these nightmares cluster? Your patterns will reveal genuine concerns about your relationships that your waking mind has been minimizing. Second, consider the emotional tone of your nightmares about specific people. If you repeatedly have nightmares where someone is cruel, dismissive, or rejecting, ask yourself, have they done these things in real life? Even if not explicitly, has their tone of voice or their actions ever suggested that they could be this way? Your unconscious often projects possibilities based on subtle behavioral cues. Third, examine your resistance to the nightmare's message. The nightmare you most want to dismiss or forget is often the most important one. If you're desperately trying to convince yourself that your nightmare about your partner's infidelity is just a dream and doesn't mean anything, that very intensity of denial suggests your unconscious has detected something worth taking seriously. Freud would also suggest examining what he called the day's residue, events or conversations from the day that might have triggered the nightmare. Often a nightmare is your mind's way of processing something that happened, that activated an old wound or an unresolved conflict. Someone said something that reminded you on some level of how someone from your past treated you. The nightmare takes that trigger and creates a scenario that forces you to consciously address the original conflict. Here's perhaps the most useful modern interpretation of Freud. Your nightmares are data. They're your unconscious mind running threat assessments on your relationships. While not every nightmare means you should end a relationship, recurring nightmares about someone are a signal to pay attention, to observe that person more carefully, to notice patterns in their behavior that you might otherwise minimize, to be honest with yourself about whether you feel truly safe and respected in that relationship. Freud's theory becomes darker still when you consider intergenerational transmission. The nightmares you're having might not just reflect your current relationships. They might reflect conflicts and traumas that were transmitted to you by your parents and their parents before them. You might be having nightmares that echo psychological wounds from generations ago. Your unconscious is still processing family dynamics that formed decades before you were born. The most unsettling part of Freud's framework is that it removes the comfort of victimhood. It suggests that you're not passively having nightmares done to you. Your unconscious is actively creating these scenarios. Your mind is forcing you to confront truths. Your psyche is demanding integration of split-off parts of yourself. The nightmare isn't something happening to you. It's something your own mind is doing for you, whether you like it or not. In conclusion, Freud's dark theory about nightmares offers a genuinely useful lens for understanding your relationships and your own psychology. Your nightmares reveal what your conscious mind won't admit. They expose the gap between the persona you present and your authentic emotional truth. They show you the people around you not as you've decided to see them, but as your unconscious has assessed them. And they demand a response. You can continue to deny what your nightmares are telling you, or you can take them seriously as messages from the wisest and most honest part of your mind. If you found this exploration of Freud's dark theory and what your nightmares reveal about the people around you genuinely thought-provoking, please subscribe to the channel because we dive deep into the psychology that shapes human behavior and relationships every single week. And I'd love to know, are you currently having recurring nightmares about a specific person in your life? What do you think your unconscious is trying to tell you? Leave a comment below. I read every single one, and your experiences matter to this community.